If you want to achieve genuine innovation and progress in global agriculture, what we need is exceptional collaboration between governments, industry leaders and the community. Now, we've had a global lens and we're now going to take it into the local. So, John, if you can take a seat, I'm going to welcome our first panel, Liza Noonan from the CSIRO, Andrew Coppin from Farmbot Monitoring Systems, David Downs from NZTE, and Sarah Nolet from Tenacious Ventures, who's going to facilitate this discussion. It's the local perspective, the Asia-Pacific region, and how we are rising. Would you please welcome this rockstar panel?
Good to see you.
Good morning, everyone. I imagine you can all check out who these speakers are in the app and on your own time, so if it's all right with you all, we might just get stuck into some questions. We've come a really long way in the last 12 months in terms of agri-food tech here in Australia and in APAC. Would love to hear from each of you your kind of perspective on some highlights from the last 12 months. Liza, we might start with you.
Cool. Okay, thanks, Sarah. Hi, everyone. I'm Liza from CSIRO. My role is CSIRO's ASEAN Director, so I've been based in Singapore for the last 2 years. Our role in Singapore, just really quickly, is to promote Australian science and innovation into the region. So we're bringing investment back into Australia, identifying some partnerships where there's shared national challenges, say, for example, in food security. And of course, working with partners like Austrade to help Australian deep tech startups and SMEs scale into the region. Agri-food innovation has been a huge focus area for us. Because the scale of the opportunity that presents itself in Asia for the agri-food ecosystem here in Australia to address is massive. There's a report that was issued at the end of 2019 by Temasek, PwC and Rabobank called the Asia Food Challenge. And it called out $800 billion US of additional investment needed to basically feed a population of people which is going to grow by 250 million in the next 10 years. So that's another whole Indonesia. Feed a wealthier population. So food spend annually in Asia right now is US $4 trillion. In the next 10 years, that's expected to get to $8 trillion. But there's also some really significant challenges. Asia is a region of extremes. We've got that incredible growth, but at the same time, challenges around sustainable nutrition, waste, and of course, environmental degradation and yield. So big news in Singapore was the release of something called the Singapore Food Story. So Singapore as a country has called out a national ambition to grow 30% of its own nutritional needs by the year 2030. Right now, it imports 90% of its food. And it's really getting out there with some very clear targets, some investments, everything from the research sector right through to bringing in the very best accelerators and venture capitalists to set up in Singapore to say we want to innovate in urban food production, we want to innovate in alternative protein development, and we want to innovate in food safety systems. So much opportunity for the local ecosystem here to engage.
Love it. And Capo, how about from the startup perspective? What's been a highlight for Farmbot in the last 12 months?
Yeah, well, I mean, as a participant and investor in the sector over the last 5 or 6 years, I think I'm just super excited about everything that's happening, to see everyone in this room, to see the interest in ag tech. It's been a huge evolution. We've still got some ways to go, engaging with corporates, engaging with the customer base. I think there's still some challenges around the top-down and bottom-up. Farmers don't know where to go, and corporates don't know where to go. And as participants in the ag tech sector, it's our job to make sure that people get clarity around that and they really know who to talk to, whether they're looking for a solution at the farm gate or whether they're looking for something to invest in or to solve a problem that they've got.
And I guess the corporate one's pretty interesting. I think it's one to maybe dig into a little bit. There are some corporates in the room, so maybe it's an opportunity for us on the panel to give them a bit of a call to action to get involved and help startups. But maybe, John, from your perspective, how have you seen that working really well? How are corporates avoiding innovation theater and actually kind of digging in meaningfully?
Well, I think that many corporations today are looking outside their companies more and more because, if I'm a CEO, I wake up at night time thinking about how am I going to get disrupted by another company. So it's on the forefront of many corporates' minds. What we found is that it's good having an accelerator and getting these companies started, but they're not going to scale if you don't have backing from major venture capital or you don't have investment from major corporations that are in the space. So what we've managed to do is kind of bring them to be very much part of this. So, I know Yamaha Ventures, Nolan Paul is here, today. He's been instrumental in terms of, helping grow and scale those companies. Likewise, we're working with, bigger corporations that are like the likes of Land O'Lakes or Valley Irrigation. They're looking for solutions. If they're part of that and they're willing to put the investment in, things will work. But if we're in a situation where we're having startups getting a small amount of money and then trying to survive, it's a very tough challenge.
I know when I was moving to Australia about 4 years ago, I had folks tell me, why are you coming to Australia? Why not go to New Zealand? And I think actually that question is probably less clear now. Australia's come a really long way in that time, but it's a challenge for both Australia and New Zealand with these corporates because we don't always have the scale of that investment, the scale of that venture capital. What is New Zealand doing so well?
I presume that's a question for me because I'm
I hope so.
Okay, cool. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou, tēnā koe. My name's David Downs. I'm from New Zealand, as you can tell. I've actually worn the traditional New Zealand footwear, the Allbirds. And by the way, you'd be welcome anytime to move to New Zealand. What is New Zealand doing? Well, I suppose we've got the advantage, and I can say this because I'm not Australian. We've got the advantage that we don't have that state system that sort of, I think, disrupts it, makes it difficult, between the federal level and the local level. New Zealand is small and perfectly formed, and it's easy to collaborate. There was recently a study done that sort of says that anyone in New Zealand is like 2 degrees of separation from anyone else. And in the ag tech space, it's almost like 1 degree of separation, actually. And particularly, there's a couple of people in the audience here who are literally connected to everybody in the agri-tech system in New Zealand. I work for the government, but before you start throwing things, my job is to help government and industry work together and to create a single plan for New Zealand for agri-tech. And we're about to launch that in the next few weeks. We're just out for a consultation at the moment. And that's looking at how all the parts of the ecosystem can work together. So that's, researchers and investors and, entrepreneurs, obviously farmers, it's government agencies like the one I represent, and the whole ecosystem has got to work together. I think picking up on the point that John made, it can't be around just startups and it can't be around just corporates. It's got to be around the collaboration between all parties.
Yeah, great. So, Kappa, what do you think are the, opportunities? I know we've been working on a few to get Australia onto the same kind of page and really increase this collaboration and solve some of the silos that we've had in the past.
Yeah, well, I think there's a great lot of work going on multiple fronts. Obviously, this event is a huge accolade, and bringing people together to have like-minded conversations. I was at a food agility event last week where, again, 30 leaders talking about the issues, tabling the challenges. And, to the extent that Australia is a far bigger country and we need to get people on the same page, I guess, we've started the Australian Agri-Tech Association to try and get all people who have interest in agri-tech, whether it's at an individual level, corporate level, as a startup or a corporate, to try and get one voice around the conversation so that we can be more powerful. But, John, you come down here from San Francisco, you must look at the map of Australia and say, where do I go? Where do I start,
And you're obviously tending to go to Sydney before you might come here, but it's my first time in Melbourne and seeing what's actually happening here. We're obviously working with somebody like Driscoll's, who are working with Costa here, and they have a big footprint here in Victoria. So I think there's a lot going on. I would just pick up on your point with New Zealand, not to be a bad guy here, because the Irish people love the New Zealanders after beating us so badly in the World Cup. Put that aside. We see more New Zealand startups and more New Zealand companies and people like Peter Wren, Hilton, gathering a group of people together, not just bringing them to an event, but actually meeting farmers, engaging with the technology players that are there. I think it needs to go beyond just kind of, this is a great event, but you need to kind of integrate with farmers, with corporates, and build those relationships that are there. And I think my hat's off to Kiwis. They've done an outstanding job in doing this over the last few years.
Yeah, thank you. I think we've got over 100 New Zealanders. Put up your hand if you're from New Zealand. Who's from New Zealand in the audience?
Yeah.
Oh, you're all shy. Yeah, but they're good. They're here. They're among us. They look just like you too, actually. It's quite scary. So just be careful. You could be sitting next to one right now.
Yeah, but I mean, the thing is here, you know, we've got some of the best and most innovative farmers in the world, and our adversity has created, you know, great technology. And what we have to do as a country is just get together, get one voice, get government, get corporations, everyone in the ecosystem together, and start having one conversation, because the opportunity here is global, is to feed, you know, that 50
Lots
billion
of
people.
Yeah.
You know, it's huge, and it's really, really exciting. But we've got an opportunity to do it now, and we need to start to hustle.
So I love the talk about collaboration, and I don't think there's anyone in the room who would disagree with that, but it's pretty easy to say, let's collaborate, and it's pretty hard to actually do it. Do you have any examples, and I don't know, Liza, if you do in CSIRO's perspective or what's happening in Singapore, of a collaboration that's actually moving the needle, actually pulling different people together, maybe across research and startups? Or
Yeah. I mean, it's I guess an experiment. So we're just embarking on a program with Singapore's research system. It's a new program called Foods for Health. $2 million program over 12 months, funded by Australian government with matching support by the Singaporeans. 6 projects are looking at things, you know, new ingredients for plant-based meats, looking at how food applications for food waste, a whole bunch of really good stuff. We decided we'd bring the 6 projects out to Australia for a boot camp. So they're actually over at Melbourne Museum right now. We deliberately timed it to coincide with Evoke, because we thought there'll be an ecosystem of people here in this room that we want those teams to connect it with. Also, a lot of the applications, we really encouraged this, was we would seek an industry partner. And a lot of those industry partners that were successful, well, in the applications, were startups. And a lot of them are Australian startups. And there's actually some sitting in this room right now, which is, you know, fantastic to see. So what we're trying to do from a research side is say, don't wait until the end of your research project to explore sort of the pathways to commercialisation. Get out there at the start to really test and validate what your pathway to impact would look like, and engage partners in that journey. So they'll be over here after lunch, and we've given them targets to go and to speak to and have industry conversations and have partner conversations. So if someone comes up and asks for your feedback, please give them a go.
I love it. And there are quite a few farmers in the room here. Any farmers around?
Yeah.
Yeah, more than Kiwis. I love it.
Oh, cool.
Or they're less shy.
Could be a Venn diagram that overlaps.
That's true.
Yeah.
So,
Can I pick up on the collaboration point? Because I think one of the important things about collaboration, not just at the research and sort of product level, but at the go-to-market. And for a small country like New Zealand, and I'd say a small country like Australia on a global stage, you need collaboration for the go-to-market piece, you know. I'm going to pick up, you made the comment about Yamaha Ventures, and I see my friend Steve Saunders there in the front row. Steve's organisation, Robotics Plus, has partnered with Yamaha Ventures, yes, around, you know, investment and innovation, but actually the go-to-market is probably the big thing. You know, that channel, that, you know, building for scale, all those sorts of things that we just don't naturally do because we don't have the domestic conditions. That's, I think, where collaboration can really benefit, you know, countries like ours.
Kaba, what are you seeing on the kind of startup side? Are the corporates and the potential channel partners here in Australia showing up and providing that go-to-market for startups here?
Yeah, look, I think the momentum is definitely heading in the right direction, and it's certainly accelerating. But, you know, it's still got its challenges. You know, startups obviously have defined timeframes that are normally a lot shorter than corporates, and you know, we do find ourselves occasionally getting caught up in long-winded processes where we need to move fast. I think the startup collaboration, I mean, I'm sure there's not going to be a farmer on the planet that wants to have 7 apps to run the farm. So, you know, we are really trying to work together to get solutions that are cross-pollinating, sharing data in the farmer's best interests. And, you know, the farmers will decide what apps they want to use and what technology they want to use. So, look, we're going in the right direction, but I definitely feel that, you know, corporate Australia in the sector could be more mobile and could really get behind initiatives, and you know, not all of them are going to work, but we have to be pushing hard, pushing the envelope, and thinking global in our outcomes.
I think the corporates here are absolutely critical to really kind of make this a real scalable solution. So I totally agree with that. My only thing I would say is that I would like to see more entrepreneurs moving out of us, not moving out, keep your operations here, keep your engineering team, I'm not saying that, but go out, your customers are in other places. Nice. They're not always here, and I think that's why countries like Israel and like Ireland and like, you know, I hate saying it again, New Zealand, small countries, you're a global company from day one. You have to think about customers outside. The largest market on the planet is the United States. The United States is very, very simple. There's California. If you want to get venture capital and investment, that's where you go. If you want to meet farmers, California is a great place to go. But if you want to go into mainstream row crops, livestock, etc., it's the Midwest. So it's going to the places where farmers are, engaging with farming organizations, not just corporates, you know, like the National Pork Board or Land of Lakes or Western Growers. You have to kind of get in there, not just present at an event. You know, it's really kind of starting to kind of build those relationships.
Yeah, and I guess to challenge that a little bit.
Yes.
It's probably, it's easy to say, just go to Silicon Valley and raise money. There's a couple of challenges with that. One, it's far, it's expensive. Going up and talking to growers in another country can be, you know, a network that you don't have. And often some of these programs offer maybe a little bit of cash and a kind of boot camp stint in a place or a desk somewhere, which is a great landing pad or a great opportunity to start, but not the kind of capital or depth of connection that you might need to really get a hold there. How do you overcome that?
So look, there's no kind of, you know, silver bullet here. You know, it's like you can stay here, keep doing what you're doing. Let me give you an example from Ireland, right? There's two young brothers called the Collison brothers. Two young kids, 16, 17 years of age. They couldn't raise any money in Ireland. They were not taken seriously. They ended up selling their first company for about 5 million. And then they set up their second company, and they couldn't raise any money. They were ignored by banks, VCs, etc. They went to Silicon Valley, met in Starbucks, a big investor, wrote them a check for $250K. Their company is $35 billion now. So that may be one example, and there's lots of failures, unfortunately, but I think you need to kind of get out there. And the one thing I would say also is, you know, Silicon Valley is one part of California. Like the Central Valley, Salinas Valley, that's where the farmers are, you know, and the farmers are going to be your customers. So I think you need to, you know, maybe not hang out in San Francisco, but hang out where the farmers are.
Yeah, it's no different here, but really we've got our, you know, if you're in bananas or sugarcane or beef cattle, you know, you're in North Queensland or somewhere above the 26th. You know, if you're in almonds and fruits, you're in the south, and if you know, so we've got these different geographic spreads, which allows for different ecosystems to evolve within that. But I mean, I still think you need this sort of overarching, you know, a cohesion and you know, conversation going on.
So I make a couple of points. One is in terms of, you know, know your destination. So a lot of people say to me, if I'm in ag and food, why would I ever consider Singapore? If you're in food, you really should, because the number of multinationals, food companies that have now their product development bases for Asia in Singapore, but also increasingly places like Bangkok, is not insignificant. Second thing I would say is find ecosystem connectors. So when I mentioned earlier, Singapore sort of put out a call to the world's best accelerators and venture capitalists to come set up here and help leverage, you know, $100 million worth of investment into early stage agri-food startups. One of the accelerator partnerships that was successful had two very prominent Australian companies or Australian connected companies. So the Grow Accelerator was the first partnership to launch. It's backed by Ag Funder and Rocket Seeder. You know, you've got people like, you know, Christine Pitt, who's an incredible connector between these ecosystems, and beyond the program, beyond the, you know, the 3 months of accelerating, then into the Singapore ecosystem, into that regional, into the corporate base, into the follow-on investment base. So, you know, find those people and use those people.
I'm going to be controversial here, right? I don't know if I was a startup, would I go straight to Singapore from here? You know, I think Singapore government have done an incredible job attracting various different investors, and they've built up the ecosystem. And I think Singapore is getting saturated, and I think it's also a very small country, and I think that you need to go to the biggest markets. There. I'm not. I love Singapore. But I feel like if I had a choice, and you mentioned I don't have much money, I can't afford a plane ride. Where do I go? I go to the biggest and best place I can get investment and customers.
But if you think about Singapore as a hub to serve the region and not just Singapore is a domestic market of 5 million. Yeah, no, you're not going to prioritise that. But if you think of Singapore as a hub to actually serve a population of billions, then I think it's interesting, and I don't think it's saturated when, in comparison potentially to everyone gets on a plane and goes, we're going to scale globally, and we get on a plane and we go to Silicon Valley. I don't think the world is Silicon Valley. I think there's a big market right above Australia, and it's called Asia.
Mm-hmm. So I would say there's pretty good news here. How many startups are in the room? We've got a couple countries literally fighting over you, so really good prospects here for you at Evoke Ag. No, but it is really exciting, and I actually think the point that both of you made and might be in agreement with is depending on what kind of company you are, there's strengths in different regions. And so the other point you made, Liza, was around food, and I think it's really important as we go into 2 days here at Evoke Ag that it's not just ag tech and it's not just on farm. As we've been raising the fund for Tenacious Ventures, we've had a few potential investors talk about, how many farmers are going to buy all these gadgets, and if agri-food tech was just limited to selling things to farmers, maybe none of us would be here. It's a lot broader than that. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about, maybe David, the kind of trends you're seeing or some exciting areas beyond just kind of ag tech on farm.
Yeah, in New Zealand at the moment, we're doing a lot of work to look at our agri-tech ecosystem, and the on-farm piece is important, sure, but also the supply chain, the cold chain. What are we doing about getting products to market, in terms of fresh, lobster and lamb and all that sort of stuff. And just to pick up on your point, you said earlier that the world needs Australian food. Well, it needs New Zealand food a lot more, my friend. It needs our lamb, it needs our shellfish, it needs everything. And so you need innovation in that sort of part of the market too. So the sort of post-farm gate part of the market, for us, there's a lot of research going into it. What we need to be better at in New Zealand is commercialising that research and again that go-to-market piece. But we're very, very good at coming up with innovations. I think there's a lot in common between Australia and New Zealand in terms of, the conditions for innovation are really there. We've got necessity, we've got this sort of, we can do it ourselves sort of mentality, but the bit where we fall down sometimes is commercialising our ideas, taking them to market. And a lot of what we're trying to do in government is trying to work with accelerators and incubators and, offshore investment and onshore investment, and really just push organisations through. Not only think about products differently, as I say, beyond the farm gate, but also think about how they're going to get them to market. Who are their real customers? Do they go to Asia, or do they go to this valley, or do they go to Europe or UK, which are two different places now? Yep. So you've basically got, I think, part of our challenge coming from a small part of the world is actually you've got this huge choice. The world is a very big place with lots of opportunity, and a lot of what we have to do is sometimes make strategic choices about where we're going to focus.
Mm-hmm. Sarah, I have a question for you. If you look at successful Australian companies, The Yield, AgriWeb, AgWorld, what have they done? Because they obviously have laid a path and have been very successful. I think I met with Justin Webb yesterday. He's spending a lot of time here, the UK, in London, and he's setting up in Denver. That's one example I know, but I'm just curious to see what did the successful companies do to scale?
You've lost control of the panel now. He's asking questions instead of you. What's going on?
I think we're doing
about 30 running here.
So I would say the real strength of Australia is that we now, over the last 4 or 5 years, have started to learn some of the Silicon Valley polish and starting to speak the ag tech speak and food tech speak that investors and traditional innovation ecosystems understand. But we also have here and in New Zealand the kind of bones as well in terms of startups that really connect deeply with farmers that have started on farm. Many of those examples you just gave, and others that you'll see here today, Swarm Farm Robotics as a robot out here, and many of the others are grounded really in the needs of the users and don't, sacrifice the sizzle or the sausage for the sizzle, I guess, so to speak. And so some of the companies we've seen come out of Australia be really successful were early in navigating both the real substance, the real bones of what makes a successful company, but also having that early polish. And what's really exciting here that we'll see in the next couple days is startups that continue to have both. And so it's not one or the other, it's how do we bring together both, and that's what we're seeing more and more now. Yeah. I don't know, Koppo, do you want to comment?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you, Sarah, and I mean, we've got 20 or 30 awesome startups out here in Startup Alley. And they've got someone to follow now. We need an Atlassian of the ag tech sector it creates a lot of interest, creates a lot of jobs, brings capital and knowledge and awareness. And I feel like we've got a good cohort of startups that are potentially in that realm that really are going global. So being able to have companies to follow and learn from their mistakes and everything is obviously critical for startups, because it just cuts down the time and gives them a greater runway and a launching pad. But I think in the Australia-New Zealand camp, I was in England at the World Agritech Forum, and Australia and New Zealand needs to be seen as a regional opportunity to bring people to this region. Because I think ultimately they're deciding whether they're going to, North America or Canada or, South America or wherever. And once you get on the plane, it's a big trip down here. And you should spend time in both countries. So I think there's a real opportunity for us to work together to promote the region. New Zealand's got different attributes than Australia. Your farming community and food companies are amongst the best in the world at what they're good at, and Australia's are amongst the best in the world in what we're good at. So, I think we all benefit here if we work together.
Yeah, and Koppo mentioned it earlier, actually, because I completely agree. There's actually a collaboration already started up between Australia and New Zealand. I know you're part of it. I think you're part of it too, Sarah. But basically bringing together, because as you say, the world sees ANZ as a region, and collectively we've got maybe 25 million people. That's still not huge, but it's starting to get there. And we've got the advantages of being counter-seasonal with the Northern Hemisphere. We've got all these sorts of things going on. If we can collaborate across the Tasman, we've got a lot going on. And we'd, I think New Zealanders and Australians, we've got a natural affinity. We actually do work together well. Much as we sort of argue and fight on the rugby pitch or the cricket pitch, we actually get on very well. We said we wouldn't mention sports, sorry.
Yeah, no, can't get into sports because I don't know anything about Australian sports, sorry. I wanted to jump back, actually, David, to something you said. So the kind of role of government in this space, and one thing that government has been good at is kind of filling that early stage gap of helping companies, get started and survive for a bit longer. The other side of that might be, the valley of death, this period where startups don't make it to commercial success, don't attract customers, is there for a reason. What would you say the role of government is in being part of the ecosystem?
Yeah, I think the key thing to remember always, even when you work in government, is that governments don't exist for our own sake. We exist for the benefit of the companies or the individuals or the people we serve. We don't create, ag tech companies or products, but we need to create the conditions for success. So we need to make sure that there's a good active capital market, that there's good innovation ecosystem, that there's great research and development going on. So in the role I've been doing over the last year or so in New Zealand, we've been looking, 6 government agencies got together and said, actually, we need to do a better job as government of setting those conditions of success. And we've come up with one collective plan for all of government, working with industry and research and all the other parts of the puzzle, saying here's the kind of platform that government can build, and making sure we're plugging some of those gaps, as you mentioned. Definitely in the capital space in New Zealand, we're a bit light on investment in the early stages, and in the commercialisation realm, we need to do a bit more. And that's where government can go, right, well, where can we increase? And of course, in the go-to-market, I keep coming back to that because I work for the trade part of government. How do we support companies when they take that big first step? I think one of you mentioned that New Zealand companies are global almost from day one. So, these are not big or sophisticated companies having to work in a very nuanced, difficult market. So how can government help negotiate or navigate trade, a policy and agreement? So that's where I see the role of government, is to set that platform and conditions for success, and then kind of get out of the way, let the investors and the entrepreneurs and the farmers and those sort of people flourish.
Yeah.
What do you think about someone like Enterprise Ireland? they've become one of the biggest investors
Yeah.
or, fund of funds. So they're not investing, they're not picking winners themselves, but they're attracting major players like Finisterre, for example, to Ireland, and they're going to give them investment, and they'll let Finisterre figure out that. What do you think about that in terms of?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because that topic, Enterprise Ireland and their sort of early stage seed funds and seed investment portfolio comes up regularly. We have a similar model in New Zealand, the New Zealand Venture Investment, which is a fund of funds model. Built somewhat on learning from organisations like that. We're not ashamed to steal like an artist, as they say. Great ideas. We're not as active as Enterprise Ireland are. I think they were quite forward-leaning and have been for a long time. Certainly, I think there's a role for government to try and attract and stimulate funds to come to New Zealand. Finisterre is a good example, actually. They're active investing in New Zealand already. They're looking at, how do they scale that out? And we as government are saying, well, how could we further incent you to do that, working alongside local investment? So I think it's always the challenge with government. You've got to be in, but you don't want to be distorting the market too much. You've got to just, what are the right levels and conditions for your, situation?
Yeah. I think in Australia we can be quick to put the boots into government, but if you really think about it in that framework, I've been on some exceptional delegations with Austrade who are really pushing to try and get Australian agricultural technology into the rest of the world. And we've got the RDCs, which without we wouldn't be at this event today, who are doing, who are looking after their various sectors. I mean, there is a lot of work going on, but it's incumbent upon the sector to bring the cohesion.
Yeah.
The government's providing the framework through its various bodies. So, again, we should be less inclined to put the boots in and think about all the good things that are happening and how we can help continue to drive that conversation. And again, that to me seems like the biggest single opportunity we've got here is to think about our region as a provider of food, into a world that's got a huge hunger.
Well, there's a phrase we use in New Zealand, I'm not sure if it's always true, but we try to make it true, which this thing should be industry-led and government-supported. Yeah. When the government starts to lead or create, strategy, I think you're backwards. Industry should be the one saying, this is what we need as an industry. And part of the reason why we've started to get ourselves more organised in New Zealand is because the industry, the agri-tech industry in particular in New Zealand, has really got itself together and started to go in one direction. And when government sees that, we go, right, well, how do we help? What's our role in assisting? And I think that's, if you get that right, and at the ANZ level, I think we've got that opportunity, absolutely, picking up on the point.
So we're coming close to the end of time here, and I'm really excited we covered the role of corporates and maybe pushing some of the corporates in the room to consider working more with startups and avoiding some of the slow death by maybe that we heard a little bit about before. Government thinking about intentional policy design and incentives and aligning these incentives to attract other types of capital, research organizations around commercialization. We have an amazing 2 days up ahead with a whole range of people in the room here. I would love just quickly to hear from each of you one kind of practical tip that you would give to the delegates here in the room to get the most value and maybe increase collaboration over the next 2 days. Any volunteers? John?
Look at me.
You asked me the question, so I got to put you on the spot.
So I think, bringing the startups and putting them in front of investors and corporates, I think is really, really important to do, because it's very hard to engage as a young, early-stage company with big corporations. So to be able to showcase and put the startups first, I think is a great practical thing to do. And I know from last night, we had an investor dinner last night, which went incredibly well. And we saw some of the greatest entrepreneurs. So I think putting the startup in front so that we can see and help and support and invest.
Okay, great. And for anyone in the room, definitely check out Startup Alley and go have a chat. They're all standing there, definitely waiting for you to come up and speak with them. Yeah, Coppo.
Yeah, I mean, look, obviously John stole my script because I'm in the startup, and I'm happy to have conversations with you. Look, I think it's on all of us to do something. So whether you're a farmer or a corporate or just an interested person, start a conversation with someone here in your sphere of influence, and don't let it end when you walk out the door. Continue the conversation have the follow-up meeting, give them the time, dedicate some energy to it. We're all busy people, but you know, if we don't dedicate time to this opportunity that is, you know, once in a lifetime, a huge game changer for Australia, then nothing's going to come of it. So make the phone call after with that business card you put in your pocket. That would be my one takeaway for everyone.
Love it. Liza?
Well, my closing message would just be to really just be open and responsive to opportunities outside of Australia. So, you know, here I know there's lots of Kiwis in the room, which is great, but I understand there's delegates from all over the world. So really be open to some of those international opportunities. Australia does have and really does punch well above its weight in technology and innovations. And I would like to see a lot more Australian startups, Australian companies, like I see Kiwi startups and companies in Asia. And yeah, there is significant growth out there, and so just be open and responsive to it.
Yeah, I'm going to pile on the top of these guys. Organisations and events like this is an opportunity to network, and networking is a contact sport. Yeah, it's not something you can do passively. You don't sit back and kind of wait for it to happen. You actually have to dive in, and some of the best collaborations I've ever seen come from events like this one, you know, where people go out there and meet a few people and ask good questions. Don't ask, what do you do? Ask, what could my company and your company do together? Yeah. You know, how can I help you be successful with what you're doing? Now, those sorts of open questions, they're exploratory questions, I think, really good. But yeah, as I say, it's not a passive thing. At the drinks function tonight, don't hang around with people you already know, because you'll see them again. Hang around with people you've never met.
I think in terms of the contact sport, why doesn't every investor or corporate person stand up in the room here?
And bring out your checkbook.
Every investor, and who's an investor here? Don't be shy. Put a stand up.
Stand up. Stand up.
Stand up.
Oh, there we go. Look.
Investors.
Oh, they're hiding.
And
there we go.
Any corporates, if I'm an entrepreneur, they're the guys that you want to go after.
That's right. They're buying drinks at the bar at the after.
I love it. I think it's such a good point, actually, that, you know, really put it into action. Ask those questions. There's no silly questions. Talk to the farmers in the room. We saw lots of hands up earlier, and that is truly a strength of the ecosystem here in Australia and New Zealand. And just there's no shortage to opportunities over the next couple days, but it's going to take a lot of collaboration, and really that's on you now. So please join me in thanking the panelists, and have a great 2 days.
Great. Thanks, Sarah.
Thanks.